We are live.
Okay. Good evening, advisory team. Thanks for joining us tonight and for letting us know your preference on time. Hopefully this works for people. We certainly appreciate it being early as well. So we tonight just want to give you an update on the recent vote on the high school project. So the school board did select a concept and a site option. For those of you who didn't have a chance to turn in on Thursday, it was a long meeting. And they also voted to rename our high school to Alexandria City High School. So certainly something we'll consider as part of this project going forward as well. So I'm actually going to turn it over to, just a couple things. One, this is being recorded, so it will be posted online, and also the public can view. Am I right, Medea? We have it set up that way. Okay, so the public can view this meeting tonight live. They won't be able to interact with us, but they can watch it at least. So I will turn it over now to Azuka Bartlett, our Senior Capital Program Manager, who's going to go through the presentation.
All right, thank you, Erica. Medea, I want to pull up the presentation. Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. As Erica mentioned, we're one of the topics that we'll be discussing is on providing an update on the school board decision on the concept design. Medea, if you want to move to the next slide, please. And then the second topic that we want to cover is what are the next steps. Schematic design phase is our next design phase. We wanted to go through sort of what does schematic design involve and what would be our focus. So those are the two things that we wanted to share with you this evening. One thing to remind is if we could just go through the presentation quickly and then we'll take questions at the end. You can also use your chat feature to send us questions. Next slide, please. So when we initially started with the concept design phase, we started with 3 concepts and we brought these concepts to you for your feedback. We started with the hand and the crescent and the pinwheel concepts. The crescent was not a favorite of most of the stakeholders, so we did not move forward with the crescent concept. So we took the hand and the pinwheel concept further and took it for school board decision. Next slide, please. This is a summary of our feedback we have received from our community meetings, from advisory group meetings, EDT meetings, as well as we have done meetings, polls and feedback with our staff and students, and as well as different focus group meetings internally. So this is just a summary of showing how it supported the school board decision. Next slide, please. So the school board had 2 votes to make on April 8th meeting. One was to choose a site option, either A or B, and they chose the site option B with a bus loop parallel to the Braddock Road. And then they voted on the building concept and they voted on the pinwheel concept for the building. Next slide. So this kind of puts together the choice that was made for the site and the building concept together, and you're seeing what was chosen by the school board. And with that, I'll turn it over to Omar.
Thank you, Azuka. Thank you, Azuka. So as Azuka walked us through, this is now the current site plan in its more or less current state that really collects all of the decisions that have been made to date that got us to this point. And the first one, you might recall, had to do with the co-located uses and the inclusion of housing on the site. And so it was decided not to include housing on the site, so that began to narrow down the possibilities. We then asked the board to vote on what goes inside the building. And so we prepared an ed spec and they voted on its approval. So then, we understood how big more or less the building needed to be. And so then, as Azuka said, there were the 2 decisions, one made one regarding the building form and shape and the general organization, and the second one having to do with the site. So what you're seeing here represented is the option B, what we call option B, which is the site that uses or places the buses, what as we described it, along Braddock Road. And that choice in this plan enables the site to remain connected from a pedestrian point of view, meaning that from the school building, you can have direct access to the outdoor recreation spaces without having to cross the street or a road. And so that had a great deal of appeal. It does require that the site be reconfigured, the outdoor spaces, the recreation spaces be reconfigured somewhat so that it permits the safe access of buses to the south. The bus area is designed to also be striped for parking so that when the buses are not there, which is a significant portion of the day, those spaces can be used for parking. And also those spaces for parking would be useful in the weekends when there's activities taking place in the fields. That places roughly about 40 spaces near where the fields are located. You've also noticed tennis courts on the upper left, the athletic fields in the center. There's an open, more or less open area to the west that can be used as a practice area. It's not really dimensioned, that practice field area is not really dimensioned for anything, but it's an open space that can be used for kicking balls around, or if you happen to have a lacrosse team, they can be doing drills in that area, so they can act as a kind of warm-up space. And then a basketball / futsal court space, which is now being placed closer to the school building to have perhaps quick access to that play space. So you can see that in between the fields and the building, there's still considerably amount of some green spaces, and we would like to continue to develop those into meaningful outdoor spaces for the students. So I would expect to see in the next stage of development of the design, perhaps areas for sitting and gathering that can extend the internal spaces of the school to the outdoors. Also, with the building decision of going with what we call the pinwheel design, which is what we see here, there was the request for flexibility for future expansion, which we're showing there in the dashed zone as a kind of extension of one of the classroom wings. And so that there seems to be a great deal of rational thinking behind that, in that you can just simply extend the building westward. It would require some reconfiguring of some of the spaces, but as we develop the site in the next stage of design, we would be looking to further refine that and make that truly flexible, so that in the event that an addition needs to be placed in that zone, it can be readily be able to accept that. And of course, that addition, it's something that we contemplate happening 10, 15, 20 years from now, but one never knows. Could be sooner than that, but the flexibility remains built into the site. The building would have a main access facing Braddock Road, and you can see that loop that has the black arrows there. That's the vehicular movement in and out for the parking area. And so there's a little bit of a drop-off loop that would lead into an entry pavilion, as I like to refer to it, there in the center of the building. And so you would gain direct access to the heart of the school at that point. And then, as we showed before, all of the parking is to the east and wraps around and into the back of the building. And the choice in that has always been guided by wanting to minimize the presence of the parking in front of the school, feeling that that the school really should be the most important element on the site and should have its front door clearly visible from the street. So the parking, while it needs to be convenience, is of a secondary nature to the school itself. And then just making some reservation of space for, if you look at the lower right-hand corner of the site, to potentially widen to the right, a little bit more to the right, yeah, right there, potentially widen the sidewalk and create a more pedestrian-friendly um, access way in the form of sidewalks between that point there and the front door. And so just trying to prioritize the pedestrian experience and making sure that it is as safe as possible. We are aware of the Vision Zero plans, as has been brought up here in other calls before, and our civil engineer, who's now beginning to take a closer look at this idea and at this site plan here to further refine it is looking at through the lens of the Vision Zero guidelines. And so we hope to see more detail regarding safety and how do we enable safe pedestrian crossings throughout the site. And then lastly, the lighter green zones that you see here are an approximation of some of the stormwater management features that will be needed. I suspect that as we develop the site a little more and we understand the impact of the building a little better on the site, those areas may grow, may have to be adjusted in order to facilitate that aspect of the site to be managed, the stormwater management. And then we continue to have a loop, a pedestrian loop around the athletic fields, and that's an important element that we're trying to connect all of the parts of the site with a measured loop. And so I also expect that in the next iteration of this design, we'll see a little more definition and a little more clarity as to how that is maintained around the site. So with that, we can go to the next slide. This is the massing concept shown here in a model form. And so some of the features of this concept is how it organizes the learning neighborhoods around what we call a kind of pinwheel motion around the heart of the school. And the heart of the school is an important element for us because it used to be that schools were designed in such a way that were very efficient in how students move in and through them, right? You would have a corridor and then you would have classrooms on either side, and that was it. But knowing what we know now about how students learn and how the kinds of spaces they need for their emotional well-being, we need to design schools a little more conscientious and provide a broader variety of spaces. And so this idea of the heart of the school is important because from this one space, you will be able to see many of the things that the school has to offer. So imagine coming into this lobby area and you can see CTE labs, you can see science labs, you can see some of the admin spaces, right? Because we need to have grown-ups nearby. And so many of the things that the school have to offer and make available to the students will be seen from this great heart of the school space. So, but also it connects to the outside. So from this heart of the school, you'll be able to see outside, you'll be able to connect to the fields and really connect the entire site visually. And then lastly here, on-grade parking, which is an idea that's been present on these site concepts for a couple of months now. We did look at structured parking and compared to the, when you compare that to the budget that is provided for the project, it just became prohibitive. And so we needed to, it was clear early on that we needed to look for solutions where we provided parking on grade and integrate that into the design. Next. These are some floor plans, and it shows a lot of lines and some colors, but I think that what I would like for you to take away from this is that we've gone through a great deal of examination of the program to see how we can creatively stack all of the program elements and still maintain the integrity of the big ideas that the school is about, which is creating neighborhoods of spaces, neighborhoods of classrooms and learning spaces that, in my mind, begin to break down the scale of the school. This is a school of 1,600 students, and so how do you create meaningful spaces where teachers know their students on a very personal level. And one of the ways in which you can do that is creating smaller communities of learners. And so the deep blue spaces are those classroom spaces, and they're flanked by the teal color spaces, which are CTE labs, and the lighter blue spaces, which are science labs. So each learning community is more or less self-contained, although students are allowed to travel to other parts of the school, certainly. And then the pool, which is on the lower level, the floor number 1, as a double volume space, which gets daylight, incidental daylight from the north, and then the gymnasium on top, right? And so we're stacking 2 big volume spaces for the purpose of conserving space and making sure that the school fits and all of the program is housed adequately. It was raised, the question was raised at one of our earlier calls about, what happens if the pool's not there because of, budget constraints or other reasons. And the design is flexible enough to drop down the gymnasium in elevation to a lower floor. Now, it's sort of a simple idea. It just requires a little study that has some complexities to it, but it is certainly possible, and the plan is flexible enough to be able to do that. Next. These are some massing precedents, and not really to suggest that the building has to look like this, but these are some examples of our own work and some of the work of others, of buildings that remind us of the kind of forms that we're seeing here. On the bottom, there's a section, and it really serves as a reminder of the change in topography that we have, which is roughly 60 to 65 feet from west downhill to east, and how the building try to makes use of that by nestling into the side of the hill and creating entrances that can potentially be on or will be on multiple levels. So entering from one side on the first floor, but then accessing that same space from a second floor from the other side. Next. So a summary of the best features, and perhaps this figured in the thinking of the board members who voted for this. It offers most open space. We did a calculation to compare the two concepts. And this pinwheel concept, because of its compactness and because it utilizes a 5th floor, it provided for the most compact footprint and therefore more open space. It does have the most parking as a result of that as well. Has the best relationship of learning spaces with the heart of the school and how they're spinning around that center space that I described. The most compact school building with the least footprint out of all of the concepts that we studied. It has some flexibility for future expansion, as we saw in the site plan diagram. And the entrance will be clearly visible from Braddock Road. And this is one that I think is important from a civic presence point of view, and making sure that one understand something as simple as how to enter the building. And so that's clearly demonstrated with this concept. Next. So these are some statistics here. The building gross square foot is hovering at around 297,000 square feet. This, of course, I say approximate because as we continue to develop and fine tune the design, this number might fluctuate and change, but it'll hover around this figure. The open space is about 346,000 square feet. There's about 200 total parking spaces, of which 160 are dedicated and 40 are shared. And by shared, we mean they are located where the bus loop is. So when the buses are there, obviously those spaces would not be available, but when the buses leave, then those spaces become available for use. Next. So I wanted to just briefly talk about process and what to expect in the coming weeks and months. And so we are now in the beginning of what we call schematic design. And this is going to culminate or run alongside the DSUP application, which will then, at which point we will be advancing to what we call design development. So in schematic design, we start to answer a little more detail about the project, but still some of the questions that we ask are not super detailed, right? We're still kind of getting a sense of how large the building is, whether all the program is truly represented, and how big those spaces are. We do start to talk a little bit about mechanical systems, although we don't really get into a whole lot of detail, but we start to allocate spaces necessary for the mechanical systems to be integrated. And we start to talk about structure too, a little bit in broad terms, you know, where we have big, large span spaces, we start to get an understanding of how much space we need roughly for the structure to exist, and things of that nature. So to better illustrate that, we can go to the next slide and see some examples of graphics that you might expect to see. Now, these graphics we're seeing here are not this project. This is other projects that have gone through the same process as every architectural project does. And so it does, these images reflect the level of resolution, if you will, of what one might expect during schematic design phase. So you see that at the top, you know, the building becomes a little more real in its relationship to the site. You might start to see some exterior ideas for the building, perhaps suggestion about materiality, although actual exact materials not really fully picked out yet, but a range of materiality. You know, we might say, well, you know, perhaps the walls are masonry, and that's perhaps about the extent of the answer. Now, what masonry and what colors, that begins to be defined later during design development. So you might expect to see those kinds of choices being made. And then a floor plan that gets increasingly more resolved and fine-grained, fine-tuned, if you will. So these are some bullets. I won't read them because it's just kind of what I said just now. But if you go back to this and you can look at it again and review it. So that's what we expect to do and see, and the kinds of things that you'll be getting feedback on during the next phase of development. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Zuka, who's going to walk us through the rest of the meetings that we have in the schedule.
Thank you very much, Omar. So our next meeting will be the last week of April or the first week of May. We'll be focusing on the schematic design and site design updates. We'll look at some updated site elevations, building plan refinements. Additionally, we're planning on submitting combined concept 1 and 2 submission for the DSUP amendment process on May 17th. So prior to that, a submission, we wanted to meet with you all. And we are also planning for a community meeting during that time frame as well. And then moving forward, in June or July, we'll do another project update on schematic design. We'll look at updated elevations, cost, and construction. In August and September, we'll update on the submission to be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council. This is regarding the DSUP process that I just mentioned, and updates on the design and site usage. And in November and December, we'll provide final information to the community prior to the Planning Commission and City Council hearings in early 2022. During the winter of 2022, we'll get updates from the Planning Commission and City Council hearings and next steps for the project. And in early spring of 2022, we'll be expecting our final meeting and preparation to start for construction. Okay, next slide, please. It's a summary of our very early preliminary cost matrix. The pinwheel concept Cost is at $149.5 million at this stage of the project, and it aligns with the ACPS construction budget of the $150 million. We're still evaluating and exploring the additional, optional programs for the site, which is the aquatic facility at $15 million, and then the co-located Alexandria Health Department Teen Wellness Center, as well as Department of Community Health Services spaces, both each at about $1 million. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation for this evening. So we wanted to open it up for discussions, questions, and comments. Thank you.
So you all can raise your, oh, we do have a comment. I just wanted to clarify that tonight's presentation was really more for your information to make sure we gave you guys an update so you could help us spread the word about the school board's vote from last week, and then just prepare us for our next conversations, because now is kind of where the real work begins as we work through all these city submissions. So we'll have a lot more to gain your feedback on during the May meetings. But Mr. Gonzalez, why don't you go ahead?
Hi there. Just can you hear me? Hey, no, I'm glad to hear that you're looking at the Vision Zero plan for ideas or concepts, but also the city has complete streets policies that will also help get the kids in and out of there, hopefully in a safe manner. What you talked about, the like sidewalk width and access points, if you can definitely look at complete streets around the entire campus area, actually would make it work well for the kids to get in and out of that space safely.
Great. Yeah, great. Thank you for that reminder. Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and not to put Perkins Eastman on the spot, but one of the things, at least I know I'm hoping we see is, based on the school board selection, we now have 4 curb cuts. And I think we maybe thought there would be 3, but 4 seems like something hopefully we can work to, or how do we make sure that if it is 4, that they are as safe as possible and abiding by all those policies. So I think that's just one of those design things we'll continue to work on.
Erica, Tom Fulton had his hand up.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Omar, at our last meeting, you just very, very briefly touched on a comment that each floor would have an eating space. And I really thought about that a great deal. And I'm wondering about the segregation that naturally occurs, particularly in a vertical structure like that. Perhaps you're inadvertently segregating children or young adults in a way that wouldn't favor the sort of interaction that the school and the community really desire. I mean, this is a very vertical space, 5 stories tall. And if you put eating areas on each floor, I could see that quickly becoming a you don't eat here, you eat downstairs. We eat up here.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. My colleague, oh, there's Sean.
Yep. I can perhaps tackle that one.
Yep.
So the idea of distributing the dining, accomplishes a couple of different goals for the school. One is to create a more intimate and less institutional environment than is typical of a high school of this size. And yes, and not to point at King Street, but King Street has an absolutely vast dining room, right? And so that creates a very different kind of ambiance than what we're trying to create in this newer environment. Not that those there's anything really wrong with the King Street piece, but we're trying to do something that creates a different set of options within the environment, so that if you wanted to go dine at King Street, in fact, the way we're helping the school district to reconceive the class schedule is around this idea of a community lunch and learn, so that potentially everybody is eating at the same time, and they would have their discretion to dine in any part of the campus that they see fit. So they could dine at the King Street in a larger environment. They could dine on any one of the floors, in the mini Howard campus that they see fit. They wouldn't necessarily be required to be in any one space. They could opt to eat with whomever and wherever they want. And that includes other environments, including the extended learning spaces, the outdoor spaces, in many ways, it becomes a much more dynamic and less institutional environment. But the other reason we wanted to do this too is to take advantage of all the space that is allocated for dining in a conventional high school. Typically, and many of our school clients have expressed concerns about this, is that we have thousands and thousands of square feet dedicated to dining, and in a conventional high school program, 3 out of 7 or 8 periods, the space might be used, and then the balance of the day, it's doing absolutely nothing for the academic program. It's just sitting there locked up, in essence. So what we're trying to do is activate that space as educational space too, because now with the community lunch and learn, only one period or one block of the day will it be dining, but then for 7 or 8 or 6 or 7 other blocks, now we have it surrounded potentially and integrated with the other instructional space, labs and CT space and art spaces and classroom spaces that all can spill out and activate these spaces because they're distributed into the academic mix as what we call extended learning spaces, places for projects and for collaboration. So now we've got a space that's going from 40% utilization through the day to 100% utilization as instructional space throughout. And to your point about isolation and segregation, I think what we're actually doing is giving students the agency to really make a selection as to where they want out of a greater diversity of environments than to have to just sort of be situated in one singular environment. So hopefully I've answered your question, but I'm glad to continue the conversation. But I think it's actually a pretty exciting prospect of the new building.
Just one short follow-up. Will that be one kitchen or 5 kitchens?
One kitchen, and we're trying to stack the serveries around a vertical elevator core, so there'll be distribution, and we're working this out right now. We've actually, by the way, done this in other high schools, and so one that comes to mind is Essex Tech up in Massachusetts. So this idea of distributing dining, again, has been effective elsewhere. It's not the first time we've done this kind of thing.
Thank you, Sean. That's a much better answer than I would have been able to give. So thank you. Linda Williams.
Hi, I would point out on the same issue that we already use this model at Jefferson Houston successfully. And the teachers do find that they can use that extra space throughout their classes. They use it all the time. So it's successful there. And, I've got kids in school, and being segregated is no different whether you're in one huge, large cafeteria or if you're in separate spaces. Kids at every cafeteria I've ever seen have my table and your table and my side of the room. This makes it better. So if that's their space on the 3rd floor, then fine. But nobody is feeling left out if they're not in that space because they have spaces of their own.
Great. Thank you for reminding us of that, an even better local example. So.
Mr. Fulton.
I wonder, Omar, we discussed at the last meeting if the taxpayers of Alexandria decide that the Chinkapink pool, if fixed, can solve the swimming problem, and that the pool here is too costly, you were pondering whether the 5th floor could be dropped down so there would be less verticality in the school.
Mhm. Right, yeah. I think that the question was relative to the gymnasium, which happens to be above the pool, as I recall the question being framed. And the answer is yes. If the pool is not in the project, we've devised a plan that the pool can be removed, and then the program that's on top can come down. It wouldn't. It's difficult to put classrooms on top of the gym. Certainly possible, with enough money. But our tendency would be to first keep the classrooms be close to where other classrooms are, and that means keeping that 5th floor. However, the pool can come down. If the pool comes out, the gym can come down in elevation. It will reduce the height of the building on that part of the site for sure. Now, I did mention earlier in the presentation that while it's possible, it still requires a little bit of thought, because it's not as simple as just removing and then dropping everything. There's some other things that need to be shifted around and moved around, but there's enough space to be able to do that, to shift things around and move things around. So, yeah. Mr. Fulton.
Well, this is actually to the school administration. I wonder if briefly you could tell us what the issues of concern by the board were. It's my understanding the vote was unanimous. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that there was not much discussion.
I do think there was discussion. Ms. Gentry, do you want to address that as our board representative? Go ahead.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I mean, I guess what I would say is we had a little bit more discussion the previous meeting. We had an opportunity to look at all the plans at that point. So I think the board had been following along. I think really one outstanding question that it was helpful to get a little bit of clarification on was some of the questions regarding the different site options, and while all of the various the various community, different forms of community groups or different kind of participation polls or stuff like that had all indicated a very clear preference for it was referred to as option B. I'm calling it the sort of Braddock Road option. Isn't that where those are the bus lane was that some of the city staff had asked had raised a couple of concerns about it. So we asked for some clarification on that, and we all kind of came away satisfied that in terms of pedestrian access, walking, if you're a walking pedestrian, accessing the playing stuff, use of curb cuts would address that. And we were very, I think we found the Braddock Road site option appealing for many of the same reasons that, that came up among other people. So I think that's, I think there wasn't a great deal of discussion, only because we had been following along on the process, and there wasn't a lot of daylight between what feedback we were hearing elsewhere and what the board was sensing. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that's good. Well, just the additional money for the pool, that's either going to have to magically appear or the school board's going to have to vote for it.
Well, so again, it's not really a question of, I mean, there is, you know, and this goes back to the Joint Facilities Master Plan. So currently we have a 10-year CIP budget, and that money is laid out. And that money is based off of what the city has indicated they are able to do over the next 10 years.
Right.
So, you know, we, you know, we've made our preference clear. There certainly has been a lot of community interest in that. I am starting to hear some discussion about public-private partnerships. I will be frank that at this point I have heard the sentence, "We should look into public-private partnerships." I'm not, you know, in my time on the board, I've heard a lot of enthusiasm for public-private partnerships, and they seem to be aspirational, magical. Like, oh look, was that a unicorn that just walked by or something like that? So I don't mean to sound negative about it. I would be delighted if a likely public-private partnership came up. That was a question that came up, and what we did, the question was asked at the meeting, and I'm going to ask Ms. Gulick to kind of verify it. We do have a few months still. I think it was even until Ms. Gulick, I believe you said really it was kind of maybe going to be the by the fall we would really need a yes no on the pool. Is that correct?
Yes. So what we've worked with Perkins Eastman, they're still currently showing the pool within their concept. And it's certainly something, you know, that would be one of those things that if we have to remove prior to our final submission for council approval, that we could work with Perkins Eastman on developing that option. But yes, we did say ultimately by the fall, and that's something we're really working with procurement and as well as the new P3 person at the city to identify opportunities, and if it's something that is feasible that we would want to pursue as part of this project. So it's just a matter of putting that together with other members from the team.
Erica, do you want to put some odds on whether there will be a pool at Minnie Howard?
I'm not a gambling woman, Mr. Fulton. I'm not sure. I mean, it's something that we're going to explore. People have done P3 aquatics facilities before. But whether or not an arrangement like that would ultimately be appealing to the city is something we'll just have to see what the opportunities are that are out there.
You know, and if I can just add a little piece on that, just from the design team point of view, understanding the legitimacy and you know the really, you know, more than desire really that the community have for this pool. We have 7 different options on how to lay out this pool, all with varying degrees of flexibility for multiple uses, because it's not just swimming, but it's swimming and diving and learning how to swim. And so it really puts a lot of pressure on a very small piece of land to be able to have all of these things. So we have like, you know, 7 or 8 different options that configure the pool in a variety of ways with the eye of, you know, A, making it affordable, but B, really creating something that can be of utility for the community. And so so we understand the need and the gravity of the need. And so we have looked at this with some care to provide options as you move forward.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the advisory team? Like I said, we'll have a lot more to share with you and get some of your feedback on at the next meeting. I do see we just got something in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Amima. Just saying the pool concept is great, but I believe the budget dedicated towards the pool may be beneficial in other areas within the school, such as more classes, or more parking or landscape or hardscape. So definitely appreciate that comment, and certainly something to consider.
I would agree with that comment as well. And I think city council members would too.
Thank you, Councilman Aguirre.
I would say that even, but you know, if there is going to be additional money in any form, you know, it would be, I mean, we're working towards the budget with the elements that we have right now. So, and that's all based on the fact that we have multiple other projects that are coming through. So, you know, if there ends up being an interest or a desire in additional money, but not for a pool, you know, that would have to be a discussion, and again, it would be, you know, still time constrained, because in order for the plan to move forward, we need to understand we need to understand the variables in the fall. So.
See, Mr. Gonzalez has his hand raised.
Just, I asked this question last time and didn't really get addressed, and I'm late to the game, so I don't know how this all works. But when you talk about a CIP and $150 million budget, how did that 150 number come up in terms of the program or the options? Because anyway, it's a mystery to me.
Yeah, so our budgets are typically, when they are in the CIP, they're based on a cost per square foot factor that we would use. So in general, I would say that, and we've had this discussion internally as well. You know, the square footage for the total program might have included the square footage for a pool, but it didn't actually capture the increased cost of those square feet for a pool, if I'm making any sense. And so while maybe the program could have fit in the square footage, it wasn't accounted for as part of the budget. And it's basically a construction cost per square foot, and then we add in all the factors for the soft costs, and that's how we get to our budget number.
Thank you.
And then Ms. Matthews, I saw you just put in the chat. Do you want to speak to that? But just saying that the pool is a benefit.
There's a number of people that are excited about even the thought of having a regulation size pool for high school, for adults, for a program within the schools where all kids would learn how to swim. Like, there are so many programs that this excites a number of like a very large population of the city.
Cannot the Chinkopin pool be fixed? Is it unfixable? It sits right next door to our high school. It was built for the purpose of having both students and the community learn to swim, dive competitively. It was just not built correctly. So if it were fixed, would that not solve the problem?
So Beth, I saw you came off mute. You probably could better answer this question. Thanks.
Certainly. I'm Beth Snyder-Stick with the City of Alexandria Parks and Rec Department. And the city has studied a number of different options at Chinkopin, including what it would take to address the pool in its current location or provide a second pool. And so we can provide a lot more detail about what that would entail, including revisions to the building itself at Chinkopin, to the pool itself at Chinkopin, and then some of the other studies that we've done about adding a second pool at Chinkopin that would be regulation size.
Bethany, I wonder just quickly, could you tell us if fixing, not a new pool, not a new building, but just fixing the problem, would that be more or less than $12.5 million?
I would have to go and find the information for you. Unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of it, having not been personally involved with the Chinkopin projects in the past, but I could get the information for you.
I could probably ask Kathleen Griglione. I think she's active in this as well.
She was very active in all of the Chinkopin projects that we've been undertaking in the last decade.
Right.
I'm gonna say just real quick. My memory might be a little fuzzy on this. regardless, I do believe there's a significant cost. I do not know what that number would be. And I do not believe that it currently is reflected in the sort of joint facilities planning over the next 10 years. I'm not, I don't know if there's somebody on the city side that has, I'm not sure if there's at the moment, you know, a designated space for a project at Chinkapin at this point.
Within the CIP budget.
Correct. That, well, I believe that to be correct, but
That is correct. It is not currently in the city CIP.
But we do
So-
have a council member sitting here right now with his hand up.
Thanks, Tom. I was just going to say, and I don't want to speak for my other colleagues, but I think there is a general consensus on council that we all see that there is a benefit for a pool. The issue is that there are other logistics and funding involved with keeping a pool open year round, because I don't think anyone sees it or envisions it as being strictly for school use and only during school hours. And so when you throw those additional logistics and costs in, that's what gives most council members some pause.
That would also apply to this, if this pool was built at Minnie Howard as well, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I think that that's part of, if we were to develop a P3 type partnership, it may be that they will continue to maintain and the city and ACPS are basically paying a service fee, or something along those lines. But that's something we would have to figure out what that looks like. But yes, it would not just be a school use pool. That's not the thinking at all.
Well, Omar, that raises the issue then, does it have its own entrance?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does raises that issue. And part of what we're examining further is how to safely do that so that you can enter from one side of the building. You know, I spoke about how the building is nestled into the topography. You can potentially enter on 2 different levels. So we're making use of that for that purpose as well. So it's not fully ironed out, but there is it's in development. But yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, well, thank you all. I don't see any other hands or questions, so I appreciate it. Good conversation tonight, and certainly we'll have more information and hopefully more good conversation at our next meeting in May. I'm not sure, Medea or Azuka, did we have a date proposed, or are we going to send around dates? Do we know?
We do not have a date proposed yet.
Okay, so we'll poll the advisory team members when it gets a little bit closer.
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Okay,
And
thank
the-
you all.
And
Go
the
ahead.
meeting will be earlier in the day, earlier in like around this time.
Around this time, okay. Okay, great. And again, the presentation from tonight will be posted on the webpage. As soon as we can get the video captioned, it will also be posted. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your week.